Cameron to talk about not one, but two new books.
Thank you. Let's see, so this, if I go up,
It's the down one that...
Okay, so as you can see, my book launch is going to be the comedy relief portion of the event. I knew Leslie was going to do something educational, useful with her talk, and I was just racking my brain trying to figure out what I could contribute, how I could turn my talk into something useful, because I love to be helpful. And I came up empty-handed until I landed on the idea of fun. Because that is, in fact, the story behind these two books, or rather, the answer to the question, how on earth does one get from a book on economics and women to a book on vampires? Because I suspect that some of you really would like to know the answer to that question. I also have to say this is a part of the presentation where I put Chris Fann's Photoshop skills to shame. You're just going to be so dead. Well, the answer to that question is, of course, me. I became a vampire over the summer, and I needed to have some fun. No, just kidding. I really got into early Genesis. It's true. I really love Genesis, and I really love Peter Gabriel's outfit. Or rather, the answer is, of course, me, my research story. So I thought instead I would give you just a little bit of that research narrative. So come along with me as I tell you about my interest in vampires and economics. In case you don't know, that's from Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. The hair is just amazing. I told Sam we need to get some of these wigs for our faculty. I think it'll make class really amazing. So yeah, this book, my first book, is on women in economics, or really, I never did like that title, it's really about women in the workforce, or women entering the workforce in the 19th century. And as someone who grew up working class, I put myself through college working on fish boats and working in vegetarian restaurants, a kind of weird, paradoxical combination. I have always been interested in questions around labor and women's equal claim to professional mobility, not just class mobility, but the claim to those sweet professions, that job security, that nice salary. So this first book arose out of that enduring research. I wanted to understand how women played an active role through their writing in changing the gender roles that limited access to many of the new and coveted professions at the turn of the century. Not surprisingly, I kept coming up against 19th century middle-class domesticity. I don't know about you, but that is not what I come home to every day. The dogs maybe, but not the whole family. And how, anyways, this relatively new ideology and its attendant gender roles, or the separate gendered spheres, was a key force in limiting women's access to the new workforce. But what was really interesting to me in writing this book and delving into this research was how it played out differently along class lines. And this is the observation that has carried me over into my current work on slumming and horror and vampires, which weirdly, believe me, is related. I noticed that by the end of the 19th century, many middle-class women were able to rewrite domestic ideology in service of their claims to various professions. They could, claim that nursing is an extension of their caregiving work, but it would play out quite differently for working class women who were actually pushed out of the labor force at this time because of this ideology. So they couldn't access it, they certainly couldn't harness it to rationalize their entrance into the workforce. Instead, they were already there and they're being pushed out either into increasingly precarious home industries or out altogether. And so fast forward, this then became the second project, my interest in vampires. I became really interested in how the vampire starts to show up in a lot of this literature on class and domesticity. I noticed, for example, and this is moving on to this new project that I want to work on in addition to the vampires collection, but how in stories like Varney the Vampire, I'm obsessed with Varney the Vampire, the real monster isn't even the vampire. I mean, he is the vampire at the beginning. He becomes increasingly humanized, interestingly, by the domesticating, loving influence of the Bannerworths. The real monsters are, in fact, the non-stop parade of predatory parents in the second volume. I might be the only person, or maybe, no, there are 3 of us, I know for sure, who've read all 2 volumes of Barney the Vampire. Volume 2 is just non-stop parade of these parents trying to entice Barney into one of these marriages so that they can use their daughters, basically marketing their daughters in order to access wealth. So they really come out like the real vampires in this story. The marriage plot is the vampire. So I read this weird, wonderful Penny Dreadful by the Chartist sympathizer J.M. Reimer as a critique of the middle-class domestic plots that were supposed to deliver the poor and working class from their sins. And here I'm thinking about that Chartist context and the Chartist Gothic. The vampire shows up again in Braddon's Good Lady Duquesne. That's my essay contribution in the vampire collection, in which the eponymous vampire, the Good Lady Duquesne, is subsequently replaced by the middle-class husband as the one who will appropriate her labor power and take her out of the workforce. And then my latest obsession, or example of this domestic ideology equals vampire, is Ackroyd's Dan Leno in the Limehouse Golem. Poor Rachel's heard me talk about this nonstop. It's a problematic novel, but it's amazing. Our heroine is a glass climber, and she's a vampire. She's equated with vampirism because of that fear around them. So long story short, in addition to some other projects, I hope to someday write a book on vampire, or Victorian class and the vampire, and I'm thinking of a subtitle that's somewhat eloquent, like, "Thank you very much, Victorians, for your crappy domestic ideology." I'm inviting suggestions. But in working towards this, I thought, what a better way to dive into this subject than through an essay collection, because I was already starting to connect with some of these folks. And just context here, right when I started out to do this project, COVID hit. And my good old friends, depression and anxiety hit me like a ton of bricks, and I needed something fun to get me through, and this is what did it. Monster studies, posthumanism. So I needed something that I loved, that would give me life, or I would come unglued, as I would tell my partner regularly. I was on the edge. So I fell back onto this, my vampire project, and my love of horror. And I love it all, I have to say. Those of you who know me, I've loved horror since I can remember. I've watched everything. I've also watched all of the Hellraisers. They don't get any better. I don't know why I did it. And I ghost stories, terror, horror. I'll go for even the body horror. So, in this collection, this collection was everything and wonderful and weird I hoped it would be. It's kind of hard, to see some of the titles there. But the goal was to really highlight the many different kinds of vampires, many different approaches to vampires in the 19th century. We have Black female vampires, and also I just wanted to point out we have Lynn Young curating the vampire, queer unnatural histories in Carmela. So a lot of fun, and again, a fun connection with graduate work. And then finally too, some work on vampires and economics in class, and my essay there on Braddon. So I networked. I've met so many fabulous people, made fabulous research connections, and I really enjoyed this experience. So I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Brooke Cameron. I'm an associate professor. If you get to that point, I really do encourage you to think about doing an essay collection. Because again, it was what kept me going. So I'm going to stop because I don't want to drain you. I'll leave it here.